Right, so there's so much I can tell you about conceptual metaphor. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're just looking at the main points and just so that we have an introduction to conceptual metaphor. And of course, this is specifically for my Linguistics 3701 UNISA students. But since metaphors are part of our conceptual system and part of the way we think, it is obviously for everyone. Right, a definition to kick us off is that metaphors are a form of conceptual projection involving mappings or correspondences holding between distinct conceptual domains. Now, the words I need you to hold on to for me, please, are conceptual projection, mappings, and then domains. But let's take a step back from the books and the theories for a second. We're all familiar with metaphor. We use it all the time. But here's a very simple graphic example for us, something that we probably used a lot when we were kids, which is that you're such a chicken. Looking at that, if I call someone a chicken, we know that what I mean is that I am thinking about or understanding or describing that person in terms of something to do with the chicken. So I'm understanding or thinking about one thing in terms of another. Can be explained as that we understand one domain in terms of another. Now we see some important things happening here. The one is that if I call the person next to me a chicken, I'm not implying that she has feathers or she digs around in the yard. I'm being quite specific with the things that the qualities of a chicken that I'm applying to her. So that a chicken is timid, a chicken is helpless, a chicken is afraid. I'm applying these things to her. I'm speaking about her in terms of these specific things. Not in terms of chicken in general. But when we are speaking about metaphors in terms of cognitive linguistics, we speak about conceptual metaphor. So why conceptual metaphor? Well, that's because in cognitive linguistics, we speak about metaphor as part of our conceptual system. We could say that our ordinary conceptual system, in terms of which we both think and act, is both fundamentally metaphorical in nature. So in other words, metaphors aren't about the way we speak or the way we write, but rather about the way we think. So we think in metaphors. Remember that in cognitive linguistics, we speak about meaning as being something that we construct. We speak about the construction of meaning. So we don't believe that we can take some words, put them together in the right order, bundle them up, and that they somehow contain meaning, which you can then unpack and have access to. Meaning isn't encoded and decoded. Meaning is something that is created. And metaphors play a vital role in this construction of meaning. Because when we interact with the world, the way we understand things, we create a conceptual framework. And part of this is that it is very natural for us to think of one thing in terms of another, or to describe one thing in terms of another. And these are metaphors. They're part of our everyday life. We cannot think it, we cannot speak without using metaphors. One lovely example is that happy is light. So we conceptualize being happy in terms of light, and being sad in terms of darkness. So we would say things like, "You're such a ray of sunshine. Well, that brightened up my day," or "She has a sunny disposition." Now, this metaphor, this happy is light, is not something that we have sat down and thought up and implemented. It's not an academic thing. It's not an artificial thing. This just, it comes naturally. It arises naturally from our embodied interaction and our experience with the world. When we speak about metaphors, and especially when you're going to read about them or you're going to work with them in assignments, you're going to see that we speak a lot about source and a target and then mapping. So a metaphor is a mapping from a source domain to a target domain. How do we understand this? Well, we've said that when we have metaphors, we understand one thing in terms of another. We describe one thing in terms of another. So the thing that we are trying to understand, the thing that we're trying to describe, that is that falls into our target domain. And the thing that we are using to do the describing, the thing that we're using as the base for our understanding, that fits into what we call the source domain. So that is the source of the metaphor. It's where we draw from. And then the target is where what we're applying it to. And in between those, visually, not really in the real world between, but visually what we illustrate is that there is a mapping, and then conceptually, we call this a mapping, that we have correspondences between the source domain and the target domain, and those correspondences, those connections we made, those are called mappings. So a metaphor is a mapping from a source domain to a target domain. It's correspondences, conceptual correspondences from one domain to another domain. If we look at that in terms of a specific example, if we have the metaphor love is warmth, which we can talk about in terms of, he is an old flame, I still have warm feelings for her, thank you for your warm words, right? Love is warmth. We are conceptualizing love, the feeling of love, in terms of the physical feeling, the physical bodily feeling of warmth. So our source domain, the thing that we're using as our source for the metaphor, as our base, is that physical feeling of warmth. It falls into that physical domain of warmth. And the thing that we're trying to describe or understand or conceptualize is love, the emotion of love. And it's in that target domain of love and everything associated with love. And then between those, we have things that correspond, that lovely feeling of warmth that makes us happy. Love is this lovely thing that also makes us happy. There is a relationship between them, and those so that relationship, those correspondences, that is your mapping. Your mapping shows the relationship between the domains by linking the features that correspond with each other across the two domains. And this is what makes a metaphor a metaphor. If you didn't have this mapping, if this correspondence didn't exist, then logically there would be no metaphor. You're not going to think about metaphors like this all the time. You're definitely not thinking of them like this when you use them. But when we want to talk about them, when we want to analyze them, we need to think of them in terms of a source domain and a target domain. And important is we need to know what those mappings are, because that's where the richness of that metaphor is. That's where the meaning of that metaphor is. Now, a lovely, lovely way to demonstrate the source domain, the target domain, and the relationship between them with mappings is to do it on a table like this. I believe that it's Kovexis who proposed that, or who introduced this format, although I don't have that reference for you, but doesn't matter, because it is a stunning way to map your metaphors. It is so easy. It is for me it is so much easier than putting it into a paragraph or just describing it, because when you lay it out like this, all the richness of that metaphor, all the detail, it just pops out at you. So here we can see we're working with another very common conceptual metaphor. And when I say common, I mean we use it all the time, which is describing love as a journey. So the metaphor is love is a journey. We understand love, being in love, having someone we loved and sharing our lives with them. We describe that in terms of a journey, in terms of going on a journey with someone. So we would use expressions like, we've come so far in our relationship. Oh, it's been a bumpy ride, but you know what? We're in it for the long haul. But maybe we've now hit a dead end. So in this metaphor, in love is a journey, you can see our source domain is a journey. We all have experiences with journeys, even if they're very short journeys, know a lot about them, know a lot about that domain, the knowledge that goes with it, the encyclopedic knowledge that goes with journey. We know when we go on a journey, I'm a traveler. I travel in some kind of a vehicle, even if maybe I'm just walking, right? There are milestones I reach. I set a destination for myself. The road can be in good condition, it can be in bad condition. Now, if I take that and I say, well, what could that correspond with in terms of love, in terms of everything I know about love and being in a relationship? What points can I see that correspond? Well, we don't have travelers in love, but we have lovers. There is no vehicle, physical vehicle, but our relationship becomes our vehicle. We don't reach physical milestones, we have anniversaries. We don't set a physical destination, but we have relationship goals, things we want to do, things we want to accomplish together, where we're not on an actual road that can maybe be potholed or can be a smooth road, but we can go through difficult times. Or there are times when things are really easy. But again here, remember that with metaphors, you are not mapping every single thing from the source domain. You're being selective. So you are not mapping, once you went on a journey and you had blue slush puppy and you spilled it on the car seat and it got all over your white slippers. All right. You don't map that onto love. You don't map everything. It is selective. And then the second thing here is you can see that where we show the mappings, we use arrows. We don't use lines. Now, this is because we're saying that the mapping is unidirectional from journey to love. There are conflicting ideas on this about whether mapping is always unidirectional, but for the purposes of this presentation, your mapping is unidirectional. To use a silly example, if I am mapping from a chicken onto a person and I say that person is a chicken, and the things that I'm mapping across is that the chicken is timid, that the chicken is afraid, and I've been selective about that. I can't flip those mappings around and map from a person to a chicken. So I can't say, but the chicken is a person and mean it in the same way. It doesn't work. So stunning way to do your metaphor mapping in your assignments. Now for me, especially in the beginning, and actually even a bit now, I sometimes get confused between the source and the target domain. It feels like it should be very obvious to me, but it's not. So I have some ways, a few ways that I remember it, not academic, these are just my personal ways of remembering it. And one of the ways I like to picture it is to say, well, I have a target domain. If I had an actual target, let's say I was shooting arrows at a target. If I have an actual target, that target is far away from me. I can't see it very well. It's a little bit vague, a little bit fuzzy. It's not here. It's not something that I can touch or see very clearly. And in the same way, my target domain, the thing that I'm trying to understand, the thing that I'm conceptualizing, that is the thing that, let's say it's a little bit vague. It's maybe not that concrete. Maybe it's quite abstract, although not necessarily. It may not be something I've experienced. It's something I maybe know less about. if I say to you, for those of us who still keep photo albums, put this together in a photo album, a slideshare, whatever, give me pictures of this, you're probably not going to be able to do that. It's just not something where your knowledge is as accessible and as rich. On the other hand, if I'm standing here and I have a quiver full of arrows, my quiver, and I'm thinking of that as my source, so the quiver is my source of my arrows, this is something I'm holding in my hand. I have access to it. I know about it. I can interact with it. I can touch it and feel it. And in the same way, my source domain is something closer to me, something I know more about or have experienced, easier to describe in rich or concrete terms. It's often concrete, but again, not always. If I say to you, listen, do a scrapbook for me full of pictures of this thing. Let's say the metaphor, love is a journey. And I'm asking you for a scrapbook full of things to do with journey. You can give me so much on it, so many physical things, so many things that I could maybe smell, maybe taste, right? Not so with love, because love is the target, but that source domain, very rich, something you can interact with. And then I imagine the mappings literally as being arrows that I'm shooting from my source to my target. Another interesting question is difference between a conceptual metaphor and a literary metaphor. Now, we've spoken about what a conceptual metaphor is, and as we see in this quote here, is a conceptual metaphor resides at the level of conceptual domains as part of your conceptual system. It is not something that you have created. It's not something that people have made up. It is like a natural emanation, it springs naturally from your embodiment, and it's part of your conceptual system. So when we have a conceptual metaphor like life is a journey, right? Difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. I've been there, I've done that. I've got a long way to go. You never know what's waiting around the bend. These are not things that life is a journey. This is not a metaphor we've made up. We don't use it only in one situation. It's part of the way we think. We conceptualize life as being a journey. Literary metaphors, on the other hand, you would have experienced at school. You probably would have been told something like, a metaphor is a comparison without using like or as. A literary metaphor here, our example is, her love was like lavender. I know it has the word like in it, but it is still conceptualizing one thing in terms of another thing. It is literary metaphors written. They are created. They don't arise naturally. They are written for a specific reason, to be used in a specific situation. Books, poems, they are there to enrich a work of literature. They may be, by default, conceptual in nature, but they are specifically created for a specific purpose. So if we want to look at the differences, conceptual metaphors, they're part of everyday language. They're drawing on things that probably all of us know. We all understand what a journey is. Love is warmth. We've all experienced warmth. They're likely to be understood almost automatically. Obviously, we're speaking within a language and a culture. They arise from human experience, and we can express them in many ways. So life is a journey. We can express in a whole lot of ways, as you've seen here. Not so with literary metaphors. They may require specific knowledge because they were created, and we may need to analyze them to understand them. So her love was like lavender. What does that mean? You need to know about lavender. You need to know a whole lot of things about lavender to be able to understand this. I don't like lavender. I don't like the smell. So this wouldn't be a good thing for me. It was written to be used here. You are never in your entire life going to use her love was like lavender in conversation. You are not going to use any variants of that. So I hope that this is important, because for many of us, metaphors are the things that we understand, the things that belong in poems and books, because that's how we've always understood metaphor. So this specifically, this slide and this comparison between conceptual and between conceptual versus literary should show you or should explain very nicely what the difference is, why conceptual metaphor is conceptual. Last thing I want to tell you about metaphor is the difference between when we speak about a metaphor and when we speak about expressions of a metaphor. So metaphor is the actual mapping between the domains, that love is warmth, life is a journey, love is a journey. And this one, more is up. So we understand, right, if we had to go on piling donuts on top of donuts on top of donuts, as the donuts go up and up and up and up, they become, well, the more donuts we have, the higher the tower. So we have this association between up being more. We have this physical association that we use conceptually so we use it conceptually, and we have this metaphor, more is up. We have the converse, which is less is down. We understand, take all those little donuts away as they get closer to the ground, as we move down, so less is down. But we don't use that metaphor in conversation. We don't use it when we speak. So no one at the end of the term, when they get their report, says, yay, my marks on more is up. No one says that. We don't use love is a journey in conversation. If I say, how is your relationship? You don't say, oh, well, love is a journey. No, this metaphor is the conceptual basis that we use when we speak. And then we express that metaphor in different ways. The way we actually use it in language, that's the expression of the metaphor. And you would have noticed that on just about every slide that we have, I've given you a metaphor. For example, more is up, and I've written it in uppercase because that's how we write metaphors so very easy to identify in your books, right? Uppercase. And then underneath that, I've given you some expressions of the metaphor, which is actually how we use that metaphor in language. So more is up or less is down. We would use in language when we speak, we would express them as, for example, prices are down. Yay, my marks went up. They dropped the interest rates. Ratings are up. Now, the reasons you understand those expressions, if I speak to you, I say these things to you, the reason you understand them is because conceptually you understand that metaphor, which is more is up, less is down. So you can see here, right, what I'm talking about when I say that they're active in the construction of meaning. They're super important. Now, in your assignments, you have been asked to find an example of a metaphor and map it and talk about it. I've given you here a slide to show you what I would do for this, or the way I would approach it. I would not look for an expression and then try to work backwards to a metaphor, because personally I find that challenging. So how I like to approach it is I think of some metaphors that are very common, because if they're very common and we use them a lot when we speak, we're going to use them a lot in all kinds of communication, and songs for me are always my go-to for metaphors, because they're very rich in metaphors, because metaphors are so good at conveying at communicating emotion and eliciting emotion with just a few words. So I like to take things from songs. So what I do is I look at some metaphors that I know are quite common, and then I go and I look for let's say lyrics, because I'm looking in songs that would express that metaphor somehow. So one I really love is if I look at the metaphor of arguments or war. So where war is where arguments are conceptualized in terms of war. And the song Titanium, here I'm criticized, but all your bullets ricochet. You shoot me down, but I get up. So an argument being described as war. And then I'm looking at the mappings of that. So what kind of mappings go with it? Well, in a war, we have, I have an opponent. In an argument, I have an opponent. In war, we have physical ammunition. In an argument, I have arguments. I have verbal ammunition. In a war, I can get physically injured. In an argument, I can become emotionally injured. So I work it that way. I look at the metaphors, I look at a few metaphors, and then I see if I can find any nice expressions of those metaphors. And then from there, I do my mapping, and I do it on, I do it the same way that we did that Love is a Journey mapping, because for me that works quite well. It doesn't have to work that way for you. You need to pick what it is that works for you, and you don't need a whole lot of metaphors. I've just put several metaphors in here so that you can get the feeling for matching the metaphor with the expression of the metaphor, and have fun with it. I hope you're going to have fun with it. So please, reminder, please reference your work properly. And if you have used works, please put them in there. If you want to read more about metaphors, and I hope you will get a copy of Metaphors We Live by Lakevan Johnson. It is absolutely stunning. You're going to want it next to your bed. Well, I hope mine is next to my bed, because I use it all the time. It is awesome. And so I hope that this gave you some insight and a good overall view of conceptual metaphor. And if it did, then hopefully, you'll see what I did there. And good luck with the assignment, and good luck spotting metaphors everywhere.